Well, hello again. My name is Chantha Chim, and I want to say thank you for joining us today. I'm honored to serve as the moderator of this important conversation. By way of introduction, I am a Doctor of Ministry candidate at Liberty University with a concentration in ministry leadership. Since 2021, I've had the privilege of serving as the lead pastor of Bunker Hill Church in Buda, Illinois. The problem is that Bunker Hill Church in Illinois lacks a biblical, spiritual leadership structure to ensure healthy leadership continuity for long-term ministry impact. To address the problem, I have put together a discussion panel. We will be covering 3 different topics. This is the third of the 3 topics of discussion. If you've not yet had a chance, visit our first discussion as we spoke about qualifications, biblical leadership qualifications. In our second discussion, we spoke about spiritual authority in decision making. And in this discussion panel, we'll talk about the accountability structures in church governance. Why does accountability matter? How does it shape the way we lead and build trust within our communities? These are questions that not only influence church leadership, but also impact every area of life where integrity and transparency are vital. You've likely experienced or at least observed how healthy accountability can inspire confidence and strengthen relationships. Conversely, we've also seen the damage that can result when accountability is weak, unhealthy, or altogether absent. It erodes trust and it undermines ministry impact. In this session, we'll explore the challenges, the strategies, and opportunities involved in building effective accountability systems. Our esteemed panel of leaders each bring their own unique perspectives which guide us in this important discussion. Whether you're here as a leader or a learner or simply curious about how accountability shapes our lives and work, this conversation is for you. So let's dive in and let's get started. In this discussion, we'll explore how effective accountability systems prevent abuses of power while fostering a culture where leaders are supported and congregations feel secure under their spiritual leadership. We'll address the challenges in implementing these systems to uncover strategies for creating a culture where accountability is not just accepted, but it's embraced as an essential part of every church governance. Our guest panelist today, Dr. Tommy Thompson, is the lead pastor of Ashburn Church in Orland Park, Illinois. John Erickson is a current elder and former associate pastor of Bunker Hill Church in Buda, Illinois. Ken Skop is the founding pastor of Shepherd's Church in Maryville, Indiana. And Lamar Slay is the president of Partners in Church Consulting out of Dallas, Texas. Dr. Thompson, would you take a moment and greet our audience?
Hi, I'm Tommy Thompson, the lead pastor at Ashburn Baptist Church, a multi-site church, multi-ethnic church located in Chicago.
Thank you. John, would you take a moment and greet our audience?
Yeah, hi, I'm John Erickson. I am a member here at Bunker Hill Church. I am an elder, and I served as associate pastor for a number of years here at the church.
And Ken, would you take a moment and greet our audience?
Hi, I'm Ken Scott, and pastoring Shepherd Church in Hobart, Indiana. Just finished up 10 years at a church plant outside Cincinnati, so we're working on the next one.
And Lamar, would you take a moment and greet our audience?
Slay, president of Partners in Church Consulting. I've been in the ministry for over 50 years and have been consulting with churches since the early 90s.
Thank you. We'll get right into our conversation for today. What kinds of accountability structures have you found most effective in church governance? Dr. Thompson, we'll start that question off with you.
Well, being in ministry for 28 years, I can tell you that there are all types of church governance, and none of them are perfect. I was even thinking Jesus himself had a Judas Iscariot, and of course, when he was arrested, all the rest of his disciples forsook him and fled as well. But we should strive for effective leadership accountability, and we should be as effective as possible as we lead. And that does not necessarily come from the structure of governance, but rather from the substance of governance. And so accountability is most attainable when a church is clear and concise about its structure and all through its governance and through its documents, in other words. Every church has to have a clear understanding of the church's mission, its values, its roles and expectations, as well as processes for both accountability and evaluation.
John, what kinds of accountability structures have you found most effective in church governance?
Accountability is the acceptance of responsibility. First of all, it's biblical. Proverbs 27:17 says, "Iron sharpens iron, one man sharpens another." God holds us to a higher standard. James 3:1 says that God will judge us with greater strictness. There are several things that make up an accountability structure. Three of those are first is trustworthiness. Luke 16:10 says, "Whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much, and whoever is dishonest with very little will also be dishonest with much." The second one is transparency. John 3:21 says, "But whoever lives by the truth comes into the light, so that it may be seen plainly that what they have done has been done in the sight of God." Third is mutual support. Galatians 6:2 says, "Carry each other's burdens, and in this way you will fulfill the law of Christ."
Thank you, John. Ken, same question. What kinds of accountability structures have you found most effective in church governance?
I think for pastors or elders, again, protecting them from isolation and making sure that they have people that they can relate with and turn to that will help them. So the more empowered or maybe the more isolated the pastor is internally, the greater the need to make sure that he has an external advisory board or a group that functions for him as a sounding board and also has liberty to speak into his life, ask him any questions that he needs. So again, just creating oversight. I think family and fivefold are two things I keep in mind as I look at church leadership, and the role of oversight in both is important. In the family metaphor, the need for spiritual fathers is a huge need in our current climate and the body of Christ. And then fivefold, maybe someone who serves in that oversight role, like Paul did for Timothy or Titus. So how that looks in the American church may look different a little bit. There's nuance to it, of course, but just making sure that a person is not on an island and is not allowed to just hear the whispers of the enemy, but rather has encouragement, brotherhood, and oversight.
Lamar, would you close out that question by answering that for us as well? What kinds of accountability structures have you found most effective in church governance?
I think there are two areas where accountability really is just so evident. One is in the pastor, the staff, how they run the church, how decisions are made, how money is spent. But I think also there has to be the accountability in the pastor's personal life, and that there be a structure, whatever it's called, that there's that relationship there where they hold church leaders not only accountable in how they run the church, but how they run their family. I live in an area where since in the last few months, there have been 17 public examples or public situations where a church leader has fallen to some kind of a moral failure. And in almost every one of those, it's come out in the information that there was a lack of accountability in that person's life. So it's a really crucial thing in the church today, because when there's a failure like that, it affects not only that church, but every other church and every other believer that's aware of that. So it needs to be accountability on the standpoint of the church as well as the leader's personal life.
Thank you. Ken, we're going to go to you with the next question. How would you describe the role of transparency in church leadership?
I think transparency is essential for trust. And I think when you're starting out early in a ministry or launching a church or new, there's a need for some level of control or at least strength. Control has such a negative connotation, but strength in pushing the vision forward and helping the church arrive at or move forward in what you believe God's plan is for it. But control limits trust, it limits flexibility, and over time, the pioneer has to step back and begin to empower other leaders to step up, and there needs to be a transparency about their personal walk. I think transparency starts from from the top, the leader communicating and sharing his heart, sharing his struggles, and that's a culture that needs to be fostered. And as that is fostered, I think there's space then for people to come in and grow, people to come in and allow for healing, allow for the sanctification process to take place because they feel like it's a safe place. So again, I think it's essential for the safety and trust for church culture.
Thank you. John, how would you describe the role of transparency in church leadership?
Transparency means the sharing of information about the administrative and ministry work of the church without deception or misinformation. People give us their trust based on competence, which is doing God's work for the spiritual growth of the church. Their trust is also based on ethical behavior. Transparency builds trust in the congregation. Trust takes time and can easily be lost. Openness in congregational meetings lead to trust of church leadership.
Lamar, how would you describe the role of transparency in church leadership?
Well, I think it's important that the leadership set the expectations for transparency from the very beginning, that it's taught in the church, it's taught in new member class, it's taught regularly from the pulpit. Here is how we operate. I think the leader sets the pace and how transparent he is about his own personal life, that he shares with maturity things that he struggles with, things that he is held accountable for by whatever his group of accountability partners are, and that it's not something that only happens when there's a problem, but it's something that happens continually in the life of the church.
Thank you. Dr. Thompson, how would you answer that question? How would you describe the role of transparency in church leadership?
I think one of the most important things you can say about transparency is that it has to be viewed by ministry leadership as an asset, not a liability. When we feel like being transparent is going to hinder or hurt our leadership, we have the wrong perspective. And so it's important for ministry leadership to lead out with transparency, as Lamar said a moment ago. A lack of transparency, it inherently breeds mistrust. Secrecy is unhealthy, and it just generates a lack of accountability. So it's important for church leadership to lead the way with openness and transparency. This is what I try to practice at Ashburn, whether it's related to finances or whether it's just simple communications with lesser decisions or even projects, just trying to get ahead of it by speaking into it and sharing with transparency what's happening rather than forcing people to guess. Because when people have to think about it or guess about it, their minds always go to the worst case scenario.
Thank you. We'll move on with the third question. Lamar, would you answer this question? How can a church foster a culture where accountability is embraced rather than resisted?
I think, kind of back to the last question of making expectations clear, the staff has to have accountability within itself. I see churches all the time that never have an oversight meeting or an evaluation meeting until there's an issue, versus having those accountability sessions on a regular basis, where part of that accountability session is about ministry and part of it is about the staff member's personal life, where there's a trust there established, where the staff member can be accountable to whoever his oversight is. I think accountability from a church's perspective, there should be set times when the church leadership gives a report as to where the church is, where they are with finances, where they are with accomplishing the vision that God has given them. And that has to come from the beginning. It's very difficult to change gears in the middle of a situation versus this is how we show accountability from day one. And we want to be accountable to our members. That will foster that accountability within the membership.
John, same question to you.
Accountability is about teaching, supporting, and encouraging one another in such a way that it promotes accountability to Christ and others in the body of the church, but never by manipulation or domination. It's coming together to have fellowship and to help one another live lives to glorify God and to love one another. God's design is for the church to love and serve one another, to help others be more like Christ. Accountability is necessary for the church to be able to reach others for Christ.
Ken, how would you answer that question?
Yeah, I was looking at this phrase, foster a culture, and I think one way that we achieved a decent level of accountability in previous ministry I worked at was through the power of story and testimony. When everyone in the church or each member is helped with their story, and where the culture of the church is, this is what God has done in our life. It created an atmosphere for everyone where you could talk about the mistakes you'd made and how God was leading, and you could hold each other accountable then to where you were going with the Lord and your identity and the direction He was taking you. And that bled over into the business of the church, the financial decisions, the visionary choices of moving, building, expanding. All of that really began with this culture of members who all identified with what God had done in their life, was doing in their life, and where He was taking them.
Thank you. Dr. Thompson, how can a church foster culture where accountability is embraced rather than resisted?
We've all heard the statement, everything rises and falls on leadership, and never more true than in this area, as it is the leader's responsibility to create the kind of culture that is healthy in a church. And that comes with a leader's responsibility to create a culture of openness, transparency, and humility. We've all seen the damage of exclusion, deflection, being unapproachable, and the bottom line is it never ends well for the ministry leader.
Thank you. Ken, we're going to start this question off with you. How do you approach balancing accountability with trust and empowerment among church leaders?
I think when we're making policies, we need to avoid making them out of fear. I think it's important to, again, seek the Lord's wisdom on how we set things up. Often it's easy for us to create structures based on being burned in the past or based on stories of other people being burned. And while we need to use wisdom and glean wisdom from experience, sometimes we glean more fear from experience than wisdom. And we can handicap a leader. A ministry can handicap a group of people because of past bad experiences. So exercising wisdom, I believe the Lord calls shepherds to be visionary, and it's often, if there's too much accountability, if it's too rigid, it takes away their ability to be visionaries and makes them managers, and they end up serving the agenda of those who hold them accountable rather than being a visionary for the Lord and what He may have for the church. So it's a delicate balance, and I would say my caution is to avoid fear and follow the Lord's guidance, the spirit of wisdom.
Good feedback. John, how do you approach balancing accountability with trust and empowerment among church leaders?
We are spiritual leaders of the church. We are to be accountable and open to each other as leaders of our congregation and to Jesus. We are challenged to hold each other to live lives in godliness. Hebrews 3:12 and 13 says, "Take care, brothers, lest there be in any of you an evil, unbelieving heart, leading you to fall away from the living God, but exhort one another every day, as long as it is called today, that none of you may be hardened by the deceitfulness of sin."
Dr. Thompson, how do you approach balancing accountability with trust and empowerment among church leaders?
Ronald Reagan said, "Trust but verify." And so there's the tension between accountability and empowerment. And so as a ministry leader, I've found that it's always best to be crystal clear up front about roles and responsibilities and expectations, but then also follow up by allowing leaders to lead out in their gifts, their strengths, by empowering them. And in so doing, you're creating what I call fruitfulness and fulfillment in their ministry. It shows them you trust them and you believe them, but that they're not above being accountable as well.
Thank you. Lamar, same to you. How do you approach balancing accountability with trust and empowerment among church leaders?
And that this is a delicate balance of what is shared from the standpoint of accountability with the congregation and what is held in confidence. I think the more accountability there is, the more trust the congregation will have with leadership. But it's important that the expectations are clear, that the congregation understands that the elders are there, or a board is there to support the vision of the church and to hold leadership accountable, that they need to be held accountable with themselves. I think a practical way this happens is when discussions that the leadership has are shared with the congregation, where they see there really is accountability there, even on decisions that were not made to proceed with a strategy or something maybe that the pastor had presented, but the elders felt like it was a better way to do that. The more transparency there is there, the more the congregation will see that there is accountability there.
Thank you, Lamar. Dr. Thompson, we'll start this question off with you. What impact might arise if robust accountability systems are lacking in a church setting?
We've all seen many leaders who have fallen, and usually the more we hear about their stories after the fact, there's usually a revealing of a gross lack of accountability in a church's systems or policies. So the solution to that is that every church needs to be very proactive in establishing relevant and healthy policies and procedures so that they can avoid the pitfalls of allowing unhealthy leaders to be unaccountable.
Ken, what about you? What impact might arise?
Well, the impact can be grievous. The name of Jesus can be dragged through the mud in a culture, and certainly the efforts of dozens, if not hundreds, of people to build the kingdom-advancing work can fall apart and be dismissed because of a lack of accountability. And so there's certainly a need there to put systems in place that protect what's being done. And I tend to lean also towards just fostering a need and a culture of hearing what the Spirit is saying. There's something I learned as a kid, that was that my mom prayed that I would get caught if I was misbehaving. And I actually think that prayer needs to be a prayer in the church, as naive as that may sound, that the church prays that the little troubles be revealed, and that can go about as far, I think, in effectiveness as most accountability systems, but those systems are needed for sure.
John, what impact might arise if there's not a good accountability system?
The impact to the lack of accountability is a lack of trust in leadership. but also lack of trust in Jesus Christ. The main reason accountability fails is because of separation from spiritual care. Sin has the opportunity to run rampant. Congregations need a good Christian role models. Congregations also struggle with sin. Leadership encourages them to find an accountability partner to help them, for leadership to call them to take that step when they don't lack integrity.
Thank you, John. Lamar, how or what impact might arise without a good accountability system?
I think it can lead to the church being led by what the world sees as superstars versus pastors who are following God's leadership. I think when there's no accountability, it's very easy for all of us to begin to read our newspaper clippings and read about how great we are and begin to believe that and forget that the only reason we're there is because of Christ himself living in our lives. And I think accountability is one of the things that needs to be understood and needs to be exercised in the church to keep the leadership founded and based on Jesus' model of leadership, which was servanthood.
Thank you, Lamar. And once again, we want to say thank you for this discussion on accountability systems within spiritual leadership. My name is Chanta. This concludes our third panel discussion. And I want to thank the panelists for your contribution into this conversation and for you as the audience who have participated in this discussion. If you've not yet had the chance, this is one of 3 conversations on spiritual leadership within ministry. And the first one, if you've not watched that or listened to that yet, is on biblical qualifications. Second one is on spiritual authority in decision making. And as you may have listened along on this third one is about accountability structures in the church. And I hope that you'll have time to reflect on these things and maybe it'll add value to you as you lead in your local church ministry in whatever aspect. Thank you so much again. God bless you. Have a great day.